Would you think if you heard a rumor that there were a series of directives hidden on scrolls around the world that gave the insights for a divine plan to occur for humanity to transcend all of its suffering and enter a new age of spiritual awakening? How about these scrolls? Let's see what they say. Don't say anything. All right, I made them for props, just to make the point that that is indeed what this book, the Celestine Prophecy, was about. Probably many of you have read it, but it came out over 20 years ago, over almost 30 years ago. 1993 it was published. But first, I just want to acknowledge some of the beauty we have surrounding us. Today, we have beautiful flowers that Sue Kent brought in. Look at these peonies. Beautiful. Yes. And the beautiful flame that represents Christ consciousness that lives in us. Well, I want to tell you the story of how this book came to be and what an influence it was to spiritualize popular culture for an awakening that transcends every demographic, that crosses every line of religiosity and politicism. And because what happened was this man, James Redfield, who wrote the book, he was a high school guidance counselor. And he felt that his students, his young people, didn't have ideas to think about that were high-minded, that were idealistic, that opened their minds to new possibility and new ways of thinking. And so he got this genius idea to write a story about a journalist who heard a rumor that there were 9 key insights that were being suppressed and, by the powers that be, and that they described the coming of a new age for humanity. And they were written by celestial beings, so they're called the Celestine, a derivative of celestial, which means heavenly, the Celestine Prophecies. And the book is called the Celestine Prophecy. And so I've been watching YouTube videos of James Redfield himself to school myself in how he came to express this wonderful work of idealism and spiritual awakening that wasn't confined to any religion or any limited construct. And so it turns out that there's a renewed interest in this book. He says that the publishers, Time Warner, who published it, and by the way, it was on the top 10 bestseller list for 3 years in a row after it came out, translated into I don't know how many languages, they've said. And it was a worldwide bestseller. It was #1 for a year. And then for 2 years, it was in the top 10. And it is, what I read, it is the best-selling book to date of all time, other than the Bible. Isn't that curious? But it's almost forgotten now, but he said that his publishers had contacted him and said they are going to reissue the book because there are 3 populations that are all at turning points in their growth. The kids who are just getting out of college looking for meaning, the millennials who are reaching their midlife crises looking for meaning, and then us post-war baby boomers who have lost our way and looking for meaning. and forgotten about it when we had it. We want to revisit it. So isn't that interesting? I mean, I just happen to think about, this would be a good thing to talk about, because in Unity, we are all about consciousness evolution and unfolding. And so he said in one of the interviews I was watching that he'd recently appeared for his thoughts. He says that the story is written as a parable. And it's really not that good writing as far as literary quality goes, but you get so excited about finding out what the next insight's going to tell you that you really don't care how well it's written. It's written well enough to get by. And as he says, that he's not a literary writer, but he was telling a parable of how humanity is transitioning to a new age. And I just like to share how I came upon the book back in the day. I was working as a Jenny Craig weight loss counselor in the early 90s. And at Christmas time, one of my clients, when he got up after his session, he threw down a $20 bill and he said, "There, that's your Christmas present. Use it to go buy a copy of the Celestine Prophecy and read it. I don't have time to." So I did. And what a joy it was, because, I've been just chomping at the bit, waiting since I was old enough to think, waiting for spirituality to spread to everyone, for us all to become cooperative and compassionate with one another, and for, the magic to become widespread, okay? So now, what are those 9 insights? I'll tell you. Now, I didn't find any completely satisfactory rundown. There's several different places on the web you can find descriptions of it. You can just go to the book and read it, but it's very lengthy in the book because it explains it and reiterates it. But just to summarize briefly, to give you an idea of what it is, how it progresses, because Redfield, the author, says that he didn't make this up, that this is an archetypal progress that the human soul does as a matter of its own nature. It's archetypal. That means its pattern is embedded in the consciousness of human nature. Okay. So that said, I'm sure you can find more ways of looking at these insights, because actually it's something to feel. It's not a concept to learn about. It's something to feel. Okay. So the first insight is called meaningful coincidences, realizing meaningful coincidences, recognizing synchronicity. We're at a point in our developmental history of human consciousness where development will accelerate. And we will begin to see more and more meaningful coincidences, which whispers to us that there is more than meets the eye about this life, about existence, that there is behind the appearances, behind the manifestations, there is meaning that is at work orchestrating us to progress. Okay, that's just simple. The first insight is realizing that there are meaningful coincidences and they mean something. The second insight is getting a historical perspective on human progress so far, and to recognize that humanity has been through a progression of accomplishments that has brought us to a place where we have solved our need for comfort and for and for survival, we have solved the problems of immediate survival, and we are now looking for something more than that. We are now looking for a deeper, and it says, using the tools of science with the hope of getting a new answer to the meaning of life has been what we've been doing. And now that project is at an end. Material comfort has been achieved, but we've lost touch with sources of meaning. The answers we want are now appearing not necessarily from institutional science, but from a variety of sources. So it's getting a historical perspective that we've come a long way, and now it's time to step up to something new. The third insight is about energy, seeing that everything is energy, that there is an energy previously undetected by science that forms the basis of all things. Human perception of that energy starts with an increased awareness of beauty, people, animals, plants, ecosystems that have a high level of that energy appearing, and that we can give energy and receive energy from those things that we distinguish are energizing. So that's it. The third insight is to recognize this subtle, what he calls subtle energy. And it has its equivalent in the new quantum physics. Okay, number 4, the fourth insight. Now we're getting into complications. It's that most human interactions assume that we must compete for energy or satisfaction or power. And this leads to some nasty interactions because we start to protect ourselves from other people, we start to exploit other people, we start to feel victimized by other people, that kind of thing. So the competition for energy is something that is one of these insights, to recognize that that's what's going on in human civilization, in society, in personal relationships. Is greed for this energy. Okay, number 5 is called energy abundance, because you start to realize that there's no limit to the amount of energy. It's unnecessary. You don't have to get it from other people. You don't have to hoard it or crave it or compete for it or anything like that. So the best description about this, it comes from when Father Sanchez is one of the main wise people in the novel. He says, love is not an intellectual concept or a moral imperative or anything else. It is a background emotion that exists when one is connected to the energy available in the universe, which, of course, is the energy of God. So you see, this is a very highly spiritual tale. So, so now what was that? Okay, so now we come to cleaning up the messes that are made by people having contests, competing for energy. And he calls those things, those dynamics, he calls them control dramas. And I think that's a very interesting kind of language, control dramas. So he uses that, and as a therapist, I think that was his analysis of the interpersonal distresses that he witnessed when he was doing therapy, that these control dramas take place in people's lives, and he kind of organizes it into several different patterns. One is So there's two kinds of control dramas. The active kind, where a person intimidates, or through intimidation or through questioning, asking questions, and then picking apart the answers. That's the active kind. And then the other kind of control drama is passive, where a person shows up as a victim all the time, or is aloof, has aloofness that creates a mystery about themselves and doesn't reveal anything about themselves. So if a person wants to connect with them, they're like asking them, well, tell me more. What do you mean? Now, the second part of this insight is that we have to get clear of our control dramas, he says. Understand our parents' control dramas and how these control dramas affect us. And learn what meaning our parents' lives had for us in these kind of dynamics, and how this determines our own developmental work. It's kind of a really interesting framework for healing the past. But that's part of the insight. Getting clear is cleaning up whatever control dramas you're putting on, whatever control dramas you're reacting to, and the impact that the control dramas of your parents have had on you. Okay, we're up to 7. Using intuition. When we are in touch with the energy, clear of our control dramas, and aware of the questions relevant to this moment, then our intuition supplies the answers we need. Once we are aware of these answers, we need only watch for meaningful coincidences that show us how to act on them. So that's called then once we clear up our control dramas, then we're free to use our intuition. Now just imagine these insights, these breakthroughs, these ways of looking at existence went worldwide in a #1 bestseller, describing it in spiritual terms. I mean, I just, when it happened, I was so thrilled with it. And I don't have my copy of the Celestine Prophecy because I've given away every copy I ever had. I'd give it away and get another one and give it away. And they used to be all over the place. We used to have them in our library, our book exchange. We don't happen to have one around the building right now, so I don't have one. But, if you want one, I'm sure you can easily procure one either, because there's lots of used copies. And once we get back out into even our used stores, our, what do you call them, our thrift shops, they're always in the books of the thrift shops. Okay. So now, number 8, this is what I love. I love this one because it talks about how to treat children and child rearing. It says, children can be raised without control dramas if they have constant, undivided access to an adult who can give them the energy they need. It really speaks well for that close bond between one. It doesn't have to be a parent, but one person who just takes on a child to be the person who makes sure that they always have the energy that they need to get through their developmental years. Okay, here's another piece. Development can be blocked by an addiction to another person. The subtle energy has a male and female side. If you can access one and someone else the other, then for a short time the couple can be filled with energy, but the focus on the other person eventually cuts each off from the universal energy. The two began competing for energy, restarting control dramas. This is the falling in love, falling out of love phenomenon. Now, being the romantic that I am, that doesn't mean falling in love is invalid. It just means that it is a phenomenon of energetic eloquence and, supreme gratification, but you have to grow beyond it. Yes, we all know this. We see this in successful, long-lasting couples. So now another piece of relating to others, which is the 8th insight. Everyone who crosses our path has a message for us. And by giving them our energy and love, we support them in giving us the message they have for us. So that's part of relating to others. And then it says, this last piece from that insight, that 8th insight, is that control dramas break down when we name them and decline to play a role in them. See? And armed with this wisdom, you can easily do that. You'll get there. And then the 9th insight, the final insight in the Celestine Prophecy. Now, by the way, James Redfield went on to write 2 more books about further insights. The next book after the Celestine Prophecy is the 10th insight. And then the next book is The Secret of Shambhala. And I'm not going to do them today because I think it's too much. So the 9th insight of the Celestine Prophecy, which really was the grand finale of the book, was saying that as humans begin to consciously participate in their evolution, everyone will become so complete and so connected with each other, so spiritually evolved, that that all of our problems will just, all the society problems will just transform, and everything will change, and everyone will do what they do out of love for doing it and not out of being required to do it. And see if I could get a good summation of that here. The goal of this evolution is to achieve a level of vibration that brings us to the state that even Jesus attained, as sporadic individuals continue to do so. So the 9th insight is the possibility of everyone joining together in being at this level of vibration that frees us from the limitations of our material existence. So, unity groups welcomed James Redfield and sponsored him on speaking to come to their church and speak, and he was a greatly celebrated voice in New Age spirituality. But every popular phenomenon has its decline, but he may be coming in around for a second ride. I don't know. But now that's not all there is to say about our current. I mean, that's very idealistic, very optimistic. And I think that over the last few weeks, we have had a very rough ride. And what is there to say about that? What is there to say about how much upset and despair has become evident in the people of our nation and of the world, really. Well, I've been reading and studying another voice that I want to share with you. A voice in the culture. His name is Jared Diamond. You may have heard of him. Jared Diamond came to prominence when he wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel about 25 years ago. And it became required reading for almost all colleges for incoming freshmen, because it debunks the notion of any arrogance that, okay, well, we're, the first world countries, the industrialized nations, we are the best because we are the smartest, because we are the most what's that word? When you're ambitious, we're the most ambitious, and we're the most progressive. And he totally debunks that whole rationale by explaining that, having lived in New Guinea and become an integral part of some of those traditional societies and getting to know the people, one time a chief asked him, how come you white people have so much cargo? They call it cargo, everything we have, and we don't. And so he set about to address that question. And his answer is that because of the indigenous, well, first of all, the geography, the plants that live there, the capacity of the soil to produce food, the resources available to the people, it determined the progress of their society. And one of the big determinants actually was that there were diseases carried on the European continent that there was no immunity for in the indigenous peoples of South America, and the vice versa was not true. Like when the Europeans went to different, all of North Eurasia, when they started to go and colonize different areas, there weren't as many diseases coming out of those areas as going in. So that's why it's germs, guns, germs, and steel, the ability to make guns because of metallurgy. But I don't want to talk about that book. He has since written 2 books. I want to read this to you. He wrote a book called Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. And the reason I like this, to talk about this source of knowledge and this viewpoint on our current situation as a global system of humanity, is that it's not political, it's not religious, it's academic, and it's unbiased. And he's just showing us what our choices are. So in the book of Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed, he talks about several different societies and the choices that they made that either led to their demise or led to their survival. And then since that book, just 1 year ago, he's written a book called Upheaval: Turning Points for Nations in Crisis. And, the most recent interview of this man, Jared Diamond, has been since the COVID pandemic and in the quarantine. And so he describes what are the crises that we need to address in order to survive as a global collective. And one of those was inequality. He says, he points out that we cannot continue with the inequality that we have. It is not sustainable. It can't be tolerated. And we have the evidence of that in the last 2 weeks. So how will inequality be solved? It will take the cooperation and the collaboration. What's the word? I never can think of this word. The 2 parties come together. It's called, it's not consensus. It's each party gives a little bit. What's that called? Tell me on the live chat. What's the word I'm looking for? I should have written it down. Anyway, coming together, compromise. The ability to compromise. That inequality is it's a tragic mistake that has been continuing as part of our psychology as a species since the beginning of society, really. I was thinking this week, what would it be like if in the very beginning of slavery, when human beings were stolen from Africa, were kidnapped, and I know some of the African tribes had slaves that they sold their slaves to be our slaves, to be the white slave traders' slaves. Nevertheless, what would it have been like if we had treated every human being that was captured and brought to some kind of plantation or economy where cheap labor was needed, if we had treated them like a precious baby, if we had made sure that they were comfortable and fed and well-dressed and well-treated, and if we had nurtured them and loved them, and then when slavery was ended, we had still treated them like people we loved and cared about, and returned them to their freedom with education and resources and support and community, where would we be now? Why were we so brutal? Why was the people who dealt with those human beings who were enslaved, why were they so brutal? We could be in such a different place now. Another crisis that Jared Diamond says that we must address is sustainable use of resources. We have resources that are not renewable, that are being exhausted. One of them is water, soil, and they are being they're being used in an unsustainable way, such that at some point we'll be out of it. We'll be out of water and soil. So in order to manage this kind of question, it requires the cooperation of the global society of humans. We begin to think of ourselves then as global citizens. He points out that several problems have been solved by global cooperation, one of them being the use of chlorofluorocarbons, which were destroying the ozone layer. They are now banned everywhere, and the ozone is no longer being degraded that way. So he says, there is cause for cautious optimism, but we have to stop debating whether we actually have these problems and start addressing them. So now I want to quote myself in closing because I was asked to write the blog for the Great Lakes Unity Region website for June. And so the title of my blog is, and you can see the whole blog, I'm just going to read you one paragraph. You just go to greatlakesunity.org. And the title of the blog is, What Does the Future Hold? And so this is just what I want to read you out of what I wrote, just one paragraph. Okay. The Unity movement began as a forward-thinking, far-seeing wisdom, anchored in unlimited possibility. Does the solution to being able to survive the dangers of pollution, climate change, and poverty lie in spirituality? Indeed, spirituality being the realization of oneness, is the great hope of humanity. As each person becomes more sensitized, more aware, more connected to the whole, our choices cease to be destructive, selfish, and short-sighted. Spirituality must become a priority, a new frontier, a buzzword, and the most highly prized experiential process for everyone. It is truly our destiny. So now, as a time of meditation, I invite you to consider a divine plan at work, and that you are part of that divine plan. And as we hold that in our hearts, we have to let go of old limiting ideas. You know, we have a song in Unity, I now let go, there's nothing to fear. Well, it is time to realize there is nothing to fear by letting go of old ideas. Like the idea that you have to work for a living and every hour of your labor brings in a certain amount of money or wealth, and that's the only way that you can survive. We all want to give freely of our labor, and we all want to receive freely of the abundance of God's love. So there's sort of a dual affirmation today. I release limiting ideas and allow divine love to reveal new possibilities for me. If we plant that feeling in our subconscious, it can dissolve the fear of the unknown, fear of breaking new ground, trying new things. So I'll say it one more time and let that sink into your depths and allow yourself to feel the freedom and love of spiritual awareness. I now let go of limiting ideas and allow divine love to reveal new possibilities for me. And so know that you are part of a divine plan now unfolding in perfect order, harmony, and abundance. Thank you, God. Amen. Now, speaking of new possibilities, we are reopening next Sunday. And this is our last live stream video for the time being until we may be able to acquire the technology to live stream our services from the sanctuary. But as of now, we cannot live stream in the sanctuary. Can't seem to get a signal in there, a Wi-Fi signal. And so we'll be meeting next Sunday at 11 o'clock. It will be so wonderful to see everyone again. You're probably wondering, will we be observing social distancing and wearing masks? Well, we are going to actually put streamers on all the pews, separating them in half so that each person can sit on a half a pew. We're not going to hold hands in the closing circle. Kissing and hugging, no. So social distancing, yes. As far as masks, I can't see myself giving the sermon in a mask. But at the same time, it's an act of compassion for other people. If anyone feels uncomfortable around others who are not wearing masks, then we should all wear masks. So I'm just going to let that be at your discretion. So seek wisdom, seek understanding, seek new solutions, seek connection. Namaste.